So today we're going to be taking a look at a Ming. It's my first time seeing one in person, having hands-on, and yeah, let's see what I think about it. Let's get into the review and let's see what all the hype is about. So we have a diameter of 38 millimeters, lug to lug of 43.6, a height of just 10.3, and a lug width of 20 millimeters. Some other general specifications for the watch: we're going to have an ETA 2824 top grade movement in here. It's actually been modified by Ming, or a third party on behalf of Ming, to have the ghost date position removed, so it just has two positions, the regular and then the time setting. It's adjusted to 5 positions, so in theory it should be running pretty accurately, but it doesn't have a seconds hand, so unless you have a time grapher, you can't really tell. But from what I can tell in day-to-day usage, it has been running pretty well. We have Super Luminova C1 Lume applied to the hands and the kind of white indexes here. There is an AR coating on the sapphire crystal here on the underside and on the top side. So, you know, give or take there, it does lead to like less kind of crystal distortion, which is nice because it does have another sapphire on the dial itself, but it also can scratch on the top side. So a give and take. We have 100 meters of stated water resistance with a regular push-pull crown. And again, as I stated earlier, this kind of outer ring here is sapphire, while the middle is actually a brass dial. And just to kind of state the obvious, this watch is no longer available for purchase directly from Ming. At the time of launch, it was around $1,250, give or take. Nowadays, you'll be lucky to find them around $4,000. And if I'm not completely incorrect, there was about 300 of these made. So taking a look at the dial here, and I do think it's a really, really interesting and also well executed dial. We have something that's become kind of really a Ming hallmark with the 0-12 o'clock marker there, or circle, or whatever you really want to call it. We have this really nice alternating layout of the kind of batten / marker and then the actual numeral. What's a nice little detail is the numeral is kind of stemming out directly from this little inner white ring there. It's not separated or anything, it's actually attached all the way through, so it's almost like a nice continuity there. I have the outer ring here with all the indexes on them, and then a more inner ring that just kind of frames the inner dial and also has the Ming logo right there at the very bottom. We have these kind of pseudo Dauphine style hands that are very flat, very triangular. They are infilled with lume in the middle, and kind of on the outside it's just a regular silver indice. I think I would have preferred if it was coating to kind of match the dial. There aren't really any other silver elements other than the case itself, but it still does look nice. We have that really cool middle dial that has these somewhat rectangle shapes that really get super thin towards the middle and thicken out towards the edge. Gives it this really unique dynamic effect where sometimes the texture looks like it's moving. It has different kind of looks and different angles and different lightings, and it just is a nice looking texture. And then on the outside ring here, as I mentioned earlier, it is a sapphire ring. So not only does it catch reflections in a really, really nice way, but there's certain angles, just like right here, where you get the ring kind of going all completely whited out, and you have the middle dial section texture just popping out at you. And I think it looks really nice. It's a really just fun, playful element of the watch itself. And it's kind of, I think, something Ming should have continued. It is a really nice aspect to their watches, or this watch in particular. And then before we move on, one thing I wanted to state about just the dial itself was that it has a very dynamic color shift to it. It's called the Ming 1706 copper, but really it has this copper tone, it has this red tone, it has subtle pink tones in it. And just depending on the light, the way you angle the watch, what straps you put it on, it really does come to life in different ways, and it is really beautiful. It's a lot more than just a salmon dial or a copper dial. It has some depth and uniqueness to it. So zooming in on the dial here, and one thing I think you'll notice right off the bat is how nice and finely done this texture is. It's not the most cleanly done, and I mean, I guess I don't know if you would expect those areas between the rectangles to be more highly polished instead of like rough looking, or if that's the design they went for. But overall, I think it's executed pretty well. There aren't really any blemishes in the design itself. It looks really uniform. And overall, it's not really a simple cookie cutter texture. It is something more unique and something I believe, you know, Ming had a more custom fit to their watch and, you know, custom create. So looking at the hands here, they aren't the cleanest, but they aren't the dirtiest either, so I guess that's good. There are some small little specks along the edge of the minute hand here, as you can see there. The central hand stack doesn't look the cleanest. It looks a little rough towards the very, very central portion. And then there's a little bit of lume either missing or an actual speck in that hour hand there. So Again, not the most properly finished, but it still does look good, and I don't notice any of these imperfections from kind of wrist view. What's really nice, and a detail you don't notice until you actually get into this magnification, is there's these gentle lines, kind of concentric circles going around this sapphire ring. And I really can't tell if it's the ring itself or if it's a texture below the ring. I want to say it's probably a texture below the ring. But again, it's one of those things which is just a very, very small detail that not only did they not have to do it, but because they did, it's just so much better, and it adds this kind of uniqueness to the watch, and one of those subtle design elements that probably have a pretty big impact overall. As you can see here, the printing not perfect with the numerals. That 0 kind of has a chip in it. It isn't the smoothest or the kind of cleanest looking application. Again, a little speck in the 10 there. A little bit of what seems to be maybe dust on the sapphire ring there. But again, it is fairly clean. There are a couple of kind of QC things I think that should have been fixed and should have been cleaned up. But it still does look good. I still do think this is an amazing looking dial, especially on macro. So moving on to the case of this watch, and I think arguably this is as interesting, if not more interesting, than the dial itself. This, from the very first time I saw a Ming case, it felt reminiscent of FP Journe to me. On the wrist, they don't wear similar, and honestly, it might be sacrilege to say, but I actually prefer the way Ming's wear on the wrist. And that's better for my wallet, I guess, at least for for now. We'll see. But it is a very interesting case style. They have these very unique lugs. There isn't another company that uses them to my knowledge. And Ming pretty much uses them in subtle variations on every single one of their models. So it is a very interesting design element. You can see kind of the mid case blends in perfectly into the lug and kind of sweeps in and swoops out. It has this very interesting look of being slightly thin towards the middle, or thin towards the middle of the case, but then thickening out towards the very end here to a nice kind of prominent lug end. It curves down very nicely. It is very short overall in lug length. It's a very interesting case. And kind of moving away from the lugs themselves, but just looking at the mid case, it is a very, very circular looking mid case. It is by all means a circular watch. The bezel itself has this very gentle curve to it that makes it look more circular, more smooth from the kind of top point of view, because the bezel bends the light around it. What's really nice, I think, is they went for a really, really slim case overall. I mean, not only does it look slim, but it wears slimly on wrist, which is really nice to see. As you can see, kind of horizontal brushing on the case sides, all high polish on everywhere on the top. I believe the crown has this kind of blasted appearance to it. Not 100% sure. I'm pretty sure it's blasted. Nice little Ming logo in there. And very kind of classic, just brushed case back, circular brushing with some Ming information on there. Very kind of utilitarian in its look, and I think it does actually fit pretty well with the design. Down the barrel, from kind of 3/4 view, at every angle you can kind of tell like this is a case made by Ming, or a Ming watch. And I think that's not only something very hard to do, but it's very hard to do right. They did nail a unique looking case that, yes, at first does kind of feel awkward on wrist because it does wear untraditionally. It's kind of like having teardrop lugs in the sense that it's not something you're used to seeing with other watches. But it's executed well, looks nice, and I do commend them on doing something really interesting here. My biggest kind of gripe with the case is, as you can see, the crown I think is fairly large and actually does dip a little bit below the case back itself, or the mid case itself. So what happens is, because it does thin out towards the middle but thickens a little bit towards the end, it does end up digging into the wrist a little too much, being a little uncomfortable. If you wear it more closer to the bone like I do, it's not the most comfortable watch, but if you wear it more above the bone or below the bone, whichever position that's considered, it is a little bit more comfortable. Moving on to how this watch wears. Earlier I was wearing this Young Hands Meister. I believe it's called the Meister. I'll fix that if it's not. The reason I really wore this is because it's one of those watches I think that combats the Ming in terms of case design and ergonomics. Not only is it a beautiful design, it was very sweeping, very kind of Bauhaus and minimalist, very short lugs, but it's perfectly designed, super thin, super comfortable on wrist with that kind of UFO shape. So yeah, let's see how this wears compared to the Ming. So here we have the Ming on my 6.5 inch wrist. And first off, this is not the actual original strap. This is just a strap from King Leathercraft that I think is the most perfect pairing for this watch that I could have ever imagined. It just looks amazing and plays with the tones perfectly. Looking at how the watch wears on wrist, it wears what I would consider beautifully. It has very short lugs. It plants itself very nicely. It wears very thinly and very close to the wrist again. So it is a very comfortable watch to wear, minus the fact that the crown does dig. As you can see there, it's already kind of pushing into my wrist from that angle because of how flatly and slimly the watch wears. Again, if you're wearing it more above the bone here, which I have closer to like a 6-inch wrist there, and it still fits wonderfully. So you can wear this watch on pretty much any wrist size. Again, more comfortable there, doesn't dig as much, but it's really not how I like to wear my watches. Looking at the Ming from more of a side view, as you can see, it's not necessarily the most conforming case, but because it's so thin and the case back sits right into the wrist, it does allow itself to plant really nicely, and any kind of flexion is met with what I would consider fairly gentle corners, and I expected it to kind of feel harsher and feel more sharp than it actually does. Again, the only sharpness that I get is from the crown, so it is a comfortable watch, but that is an area that would need improvement. So here's the original Ming strap, and as you can see, there's this kind of like bunching up of the leather that happens. And the original owner only wore this, I think, twice, 3 times, and that's not how leather straps should look after that many uses. So really not a testament to how good the leather is, but what's nice is it does have this very clean, integrated look. It's very, very close to the case because Ming utilizes 2 different lug hole placements, one closer to the case for curved end straps like their proprietary one, and one a little farther away for kind of straight end straps, and I'll show you that in a second. But as you can see, I think the strap does pair nicely. It has a nice kind of curvaceousness to it, quick release as well, which is nice to see. But not my favorite, not good quality either. Nice little Ming buckle, but hey, it is what it is. Here we have it on the wrist. Again, it doesn't feel like the highest quality strap, and it shows. And then really quickly, if you look in there, you can see the 2 different lug hole placements, the further one for the standard straight string bars and the closer one for curved. And then let me just get this in there. And here we have the kind of taupe leather strap from Vario. Really beautiful combination, I think, here. Nice kind of subdued tones to kind of let the dial shine. So I dig it, and let's get on the wrist. One thing I will say about the watch, because the dial is this copperish, pinkish, reddish hue, which is very specific, sometimes I kind of find it hard to get a strap that matches perfectly or that I like the way it looks with it. But I do think this is a decent combo. Looks pretty nice. The sandy tones match well with the whatever tone you would call that dial. So yeah, I think the pink strap kind of brings out the more reddish pink tones in the watch itself too. It makes it a little bit more fun, a lot less serious. So yeah, I like the combo. Looks really nice in my opinion. Again, the way the dial catches the light, pretty amazing honestly. That sapphire outer ring, really unique. Not really any company off the top of my head has done that before, and it shows with how awesome it is. Lastly, the white Archer silicone strap. Again, I think it pairs amazingly, not only because it's super comfortable and super flexible because it's silicone, but you have the nice white tones on the dial. And thankfully, Ming did not go with a kind of C3 application that looks very green. The C1 looks a lot better, and I commend them on that. There we have it. Super fun, super summery, super comfortable. And then sometimes, just one thing to note, I think the white strap kind of brings out this quote-unquote flaw more. The white of the actual hand inlaid lume does differ a little bit from the outer track. Small little detail, again, kind of for $12.50. I wouldn't necessarily expect that to be a perfect match, but it would be nice going forward if they did a little bit better on that matching aspect. So taking a look at the lume here, and I think Ming did a decent job on it. Not only do I think it looks really, really cool just because almost every element is loomed, I do think it's a slight misstep for them not to have the inner track loomed with the kind of Ming logo, but you can only ask for so much. Overall, it does look okay. The tones of the hands and the outer track do match pretty well. There's not a glaring kind of brightness difference, but it is not the strongest. It does not last forever, but while it does last, it looks cool. Reluming and comparing to the Timex, as you can see, the Timex is brighter. It's a little bit bluer in tone, which kind of belies the fact that this is more of a Superluminova application than a BGW9 one. But again, Ming did an admirable job. It looks cool and can't really complain too much. I mean, I really never even used the Lume. So pros and cons of this Ming, and I think one of the biggest pros for this watch and just the brand in general are the fact that the designs are so unique. Nothing else out there looks like a Ming. Nothing else out there even really feels the same way. The K-shape's completely unique. The design language is unmistakably them. And that's something hard to do. It's hard to establish yourself, give a signature look, and not only have people enjoy it and appreciate it, but also have it work for multiple model lines and multiple model styles. And I think Ming has done a really good job defining what they are and just nailing it. Kind of tangent to that point, I think the build quality on this watch is pretty great. I haven't seen another watch use a sapphire ring disc dial on the dial itself, and I think it's a really, really cool and fun aspect of the watch. I think this sapphire ring in itself is probably one of my favorite aspects of the watch, just because how dynamic it is, how it plays with the light, how it is just like a living texture, a living element on the watch. And I do think they should continue to do that. I know they've kind of done away with it on other models, but in some form or fashion, I think they should use it because it's a really cool element. I think my last pro for the watch is going to be this is great value for money at retail. Now, I don't think that point really matters anymore because it's long gone from when you can actually get these at retail, but I was actually surprised by, I think I paid $3.5 grand for this watch. And again, that's almost 3 times retail price. And surprisingly, I was still happy with it in a way. I was still thought it had great value for money even at that inflated price point because it is such a different design. Nothing else at that price point comes close into the feel of the watch. It does feel more high-end than the price point says, and I just enjoyed my time with the watch. It really is hard to explain, but I think because of all the elements that they do that no other brand does, the sapphire dial, the really interesting kind of patterned guilloche, the really fashion-forward design that's not really taken inspiration from anywhere else, maybe Journe a little bit or something like that, but it comes together to create a watch that's interesting at retail, but also not completely unfair at some of the secondary prices depending on the model. So moving on to cons of the watch, and kind of as it was alluded to in the pro section, it's not easy to get a Ming. They are kind of a slave to their success. It sucks for some people, it's cool for others because you actually do get one. It's one of those things where like, well, my watch is now worth more than I paid for it, that's cool. But it sucks because real enthusiasts can't really get them. You get the scalpers that buy them first, you get the bots that buy them out in seconds, if not minutes. It's a really weird situation, but if you really like one of their designs and you're able to get it at retail, it's awesome, but it's very unlikely, so that's a con for me. There's not enough availability of them. So moving on to cons more with the watch specifically, I think K-shape is one of them. Now while it's really cool and like design forward and all that good stuff, it just feels different on wrist than a regular watch case does. The lugs have a different stance, a different presence, a different just look on wrist, and it's either something you're gonna love or something you're not gonna be able to get used to. And that's not really something you can tell without wearing one or just seeing maybe a ton of videos on how the watch wears. But that's just something to keep aware of. It might not be a K-shape that you enjoy. Another con of the watch is I don't think the like 0/0 that's at the 12 o'clock marker fits in with this design specifically. They've released a couple new models where they use more like baton markers rather than the numerals. And I think the 0 blends in better there. And they've also, I think, like circled out the circle or rounded out the circle. And I think that looks better. So this was one of their more like sophomore designs, one of their first designs they've ever done, so a little bit credit given to them. They were still kind of fleshing it out, but it is a little weird for me. And last but not least with this watch in particular, I don't like how they did the crown. It's too big, it rests to where it digs into the wrist a lot. They should have just made it smaller, and it's kind of a give or take. At the retail price point, it's not a huge deal. At the inflated price point, it's a little bit bigger of a deal, but it's just a quirk of the design, I guess. It's not the most comfortable case to wear, again, if you wear it closer to, you know, the actual wrist, the hand, like I do. But if you wear it below the wrist bone, you'll be more fine. It's just a matter of taste, but at times it was uncomfortable to wear it solely because of the crown position. So final thoughts on the Ming, and it's really a cool watch. I think a testament to how good it is the fact that I didn't expect to like the watch at all. I didn't expect to mesh well with the color, the design, just anything about the watch really. And I got it in, and I was almost immediately blown away when I took it out of the packaging. It has just this life to it. Again, that sapphire ring within it has this beautiful tone to it. The dial itself has a very beautiful, not just one-dimensional color. It's very chameleon-like in what colors it can take on. So it definitely surprised me on almost every front. The crown, again, is a little bit of an issue, and I wish it would fix. It would make it almost a perfect watch in a sense. But everyone has those little growing pains, those little niggles. It happens. But I think in the end, it's a great watch. If you love the design, if you even are considering getting one, I think it's awesome because they're doing something just no one else is doing. It doesn't look like any other design out there. It doesn't look like a Tudor. It doesn't look like a Rolex. It doesn't look like an Omega. It's its own thing. And it's nice to see someone doing something different, something just a little off the beaten path. Is it worth paying so much above retail for one? That really depends on you. How much do you like the design, and how much are you willing to pay over retail, really? I think, again, this one is about 3-4 times over retail, and arguably it's still kind of worth it. It still is much more unique than most of the other watch offerings at that price point. It still is an amazing watch. It holds its value decently well, so even though it's a little expensive, you won't lose your shirt if you have to sell it. So it's one of those weird things. At the end of the day, it's a great watch. It's a fun watch to own. It will stand out on a watch box, undoubtedly. It just depends how much you're willing to bleed for it. So in the end, I hope you got something out of the video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in another one.